The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Dallas County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Rows of wooden benches were filled with reporters, attorneys, and curious onlookers. Everyone had heard the rumors. Something was about to happen. At the center of the room stood Jasmine Crockett. She was poised behind the plaintiff's table in a simple but elegant navy suit. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, her back straight, her chin high. She had always known the law could be a double-edged sword, but she never expected it to turn on her in such a public way. Jasmine had spent years fighting for civil rights, exposing misconduct and standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. Today was supposed to be routine. She was testifying in a hearing on police accountability. But the tension in the air hinted that something more sinister was brewing. Across the room sat Officer Brian Kane, a decorated but controversial figure with a long history of complaints buried under piles of paperwork. He stared at Jasmine with thinly veiled contempt, his fingers drumming slowly against the bench. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and a reputation for neutrality, entered the room. All rose. Jasmine did too, never taking her eyes off Kane. She did not know it yet, but in the next few minutes the courtroom would become the scene of a national scandal. The judge took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the paperwork in front of him. His voice echoed clearly across the room. Today's hearing concerns the misconduct allegations against Officer Brian Kane. Testimony will be heard. Representative Jasmine Crockett, you may proceed. Jasmine stood, collected her papers, and walked to the center of the courtroom. Every step felt deliberate. Every eye followed her. She was no stranger to public speaking, but today felt different. The air was heavier. Even the sound of her heels on the tile seemed sharper than usual. She began to speak, calmly and clearly. She recounted previous incidents of misconduct, noted the missing body cam footage in 2 high-profile cases, and outlined patterns of abuse that had never been formally addressed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The facts spoke for themselves. As Jasmine continued, she saw the shift in Kane's face. His smirk faded. His jaw tightened. His fingers stopped drumming. Then, without warning, he stood. "That's enough," he said, his voice raised and cutting through the courtroom like a blade. The judge banged his gavel. "Officer Kane, you are out of line." Kane ignored him. He walked toward Jasmine, his fists clenched. "You don't get to smear my name in front of all these people." Jasmine turned to face him, calm but firm. "I'm stating facts. You don't intimidate me." In a flash, his hand came up. A sharp slap echoed across the courtroom. Gasps filled the air, and just like that, everything changed. The sound of the slap had barely faded before chaos broke out. The courtroom erupted in gasps, shouts, and movement. The judge stood up abruptly, slamming the gavel repeatedly against the bench. "Order! Order in this courtroom!" Jasmine staggered a half-step back, but did not fall. She steadied herself, her face turned slightly from the blow, her cheek already reddening. Slowly she turned to face Officer Kane. Her eyes locked on his, not with fear, but with a calm that froze the room. Security guards rushed forward. 2 officers moved swiftly to restrain Kane, who was still breathing hard, his face flushed with rage. "Get your hands off me!" Kane barked, trying to shake them off. "You just assaulted a sitting congresswoman," one of the guards replied sharply. "You're done." The courtroom spectators were in shock. Some stood in disbelief. Others reached for their phones. The cameras outside had missed the moment, but every witness inside had seen it. One woman in the gallery whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Jasmine raised a hand, not to strike back, but to still the noise. She turned toward the judge. "Your Honor," she said quietly, her voice steady, "I believe the court just witnessed exactly what I came here to expose." The judge's face was pale. He adjusted his robe with shaking hands and said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, "Take Officer Kane into custody. Now." 2 bailiffs grabbed Officer Kane by the arms. He struggled at first, trying to twist free, his voice rising with each word. "You can't arrest me. I'm law enforcement. I work for this court." "Not anymore," one of the guards said flatly. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the entire courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The sound of metal locking against Kane's skin echoed louder than any shout had moments before. Jasmine remained standing, her posture straight, her gaze calm. She did not flinch or gloat. Instead, she slowly turned to face the gallery, her eyes sweeping across the people in the room. Some looked away in shame. Others met her eyes with expressions of sorrow, respect, or guilt. Kane, now cuffed, looked to the judge for help. "This is a mistake," he insisted. "She pushed me. She was being aggressive. You saw it." But the judge didn't speak. His silence was an indictment louder than words. A clerk leaned toward the judge and whispered something. The judge gave a single nod. "Clear the courtroom," he said. "All non-essential personnel must exit immediately." Reporters, bystanders, and even some attorneys were escorted out. The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. Outside, the hallway filled with murmurs and questions. Some spectators had caught the slap on their phones. Others were texting updates. The building buzzed like a hive awakening from a deep sleep. Inside the courtroom, Jasmine was still calm, but in her eyes was something else now. Not pain, not victory, but resolve. The moment the slap landed, she knew everything would change. What she had planned as a hearing was now something far bigger, and it had only just begun. An hour later, the courtroom was nearly empty except for Jasmine, her legal counsel, Judge Hernandez, and a small team of federal investigators who had arrived in unmarked suits. Their arrival had been swift and quiet, but their presence filled the room with a different kind of authority. The lead investigator, a composed black woman named Agent Renee Dawson, walked in with a thin folder and set it gently on the table. "We've reviewed the initial footage from the courtroom cameras," she said, her voice clear and steady. "There is no ambiguity. Officer Kane struck a sitting member of Congress without provocation." She turned toward the judge. "We are also aware that Officer Kane has a prior complaint on file for excessive force. That complaint was dismissed due to lack of video evidence. This time there is no such defense." Jasmine sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She had said very little since Kane's arrest, letting the facts speak for themselves. Agent Dawson opened the folder. "But there's more," she said. "In the last 45 minutes we have received 3 calls from individuals within your courthouse staff. It appears Officer Kane has been involved in several incidents of targeted aggression against defendants and attorneys of color over the past 2 years. None of these were formally recorded." The judge's expression stiffened. "I wasn't aware of those." "You should have been," Dawson said simply. "And that may be the next part of this investigation." A quiet weight settled over the room. Jasmine finally looked up. "I didn't come here to expose anyone," she said, "but I also will not pretend this was isolated. That slap was not just about me. It was about every person who never had cameras, never had witnesses, and never had a voice." Later that afternoon, the courthouse lobby filled with quiet murmurs. News of Officer Kane's arrest had spread beyond the courtroom. Journalists lingered outside. Inside, something unexpected began to happen. One by one, people began stepping forward. A young Latina paralegal named Sophia approached Agent Dawson in the hallway. "I didn't think I'd ever say this," she whispered, "but Officer Kane once shoved me during a security check. I was 7 months pregnant at the time. I reported it to my supervisor. They told me to let it go." An older black man in a maintenance uniform walked up next. His name was Leonard. He had been cleaning the courtrooms for over a decade. "That man spat near my feet once," Leonard said quietly. "I never told anyone, figured no one would care." Then came Thomas, a former public defender. "He used to glare at my clients when they were young black men," Thomas said. "He didn't need to say anything. That look was enough to make people nervous. You can't measure that in a report, but it affects everything." By the end of the day, Agent Dawson's team had taken statements from 11 different people. None had felt safe speaking until now. Jasmine remained in a small room off the side of the hallway. Her hands rested on a warm cup of tea, untouched. Emily, her junior legal aide, stepped in and quietly said, "They're lining up. People are finally talking. I think this is bigger than we thought." Jasmine looked up slowly. "It always was, but no one believed it until they saw someone fall." She set the cup down and stood. "Now we help them rise." The courthouse buzzed with restless energy. Reporters waited outside in lines, cameras rolling, microphones raised like spears in the air. Across the city, the name Jasmine Crockett had become a symbol not just of injustice, but of courage. Inside the Attorney General's office, piles of documents and witness statements covered every surface. Leonard's testimony had triggered a review of cases going back 10 years. Thomas's story added fuel. Emily's public declaration lit the final spark. Special Investigator Martha Delgado stood at the center of it all. With a legal pad in one hand and a federal subpoena in the other, she directed a small team of analysts. Her eyes were sharp, her tone unwavering. "We have 3 confirmed complaints that were buried by internal affairs. One file from 2019 actually disappeared from the system entirely," she said, pointing at the redacted pages now partially recovered. "Officer Kane's badge number appears in all of them." Meanwhile, inside the city courthouse, final preparations were underway for the emergency hearing. Judge Bernhardt, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a reputation for zero tolerance toward misconduct, would be presiding. In the gallery, activists, students, and even retired officers began to take their seats. No one wanted to miss this. Outside the holding cell, Jasmine stood quietly. She wore a simple grey suit, no makeup, her wrists finally free from the steel cuffs, but her presence was stronger than ever. A bailiff opened the door and nodded. "It is time." Jasmine looked up and walked toward the courtroom, each step silent, each breath steady. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had once believed no one would ever listen. The courtroom fell into complete silence the moment Jasmine entered, not because someone asked for it, but because the weight of her presence demanded it. She walked slowly but without hesitation, her eyes calm, her posture straight. Reporters froze mid-sentence, camera flashes stopped. Even Judge Bernhardt leaned slightly forward, adjusting her glasses to get a clearer look at the woman walking down the aisle. In the front row, Detective Leonard sat beside his lawyer, his jaw tight with tension. On the opposite side, Officer Kane stood with his attorney, smirking slightly as if he still expected the system to protect him one last time. Jasmine approached the witness stand and raised her right hand to be sworn in. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Jasmine replied, her voice steady and clear. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, please describe what happened on the day of your arrest." Jasmine took a breath. "I walked into the courtroom that morning, prepared to represent a young woman who had been unfairly sentenced. Before I could even begin, I was stopped, questioned, and eventually struck in the face by Officer Kane in front of dozens of witnesses." Gasps rippled through the room. She continued, "No one intervened, no one stopped it, and then I was placed in cuffs and dragged out like a criminal. But what they did not know was that I had already activated the emergency alert on my phone, which recorded the entire event and transmitted it to federal servers." Her eyes locked onto Kane. "You thought you were silencing me, but you made me louder than ever." Jasmine reached into the pocket of her blazer and handed a flash drive to the bailiff. "This contains footage taken from my emergency alert system. It records automatically during high-risk encounters and stores the data off-site. I request permission to present it to the court." Judge Bernhardt nodded. "Load the file." The room darkened slightly as the overhead screen flickered to life. The courtroom security feed appeared first. Then Jasmine's own video began playing. The room held its breath. It showed Officer Kane approaching Jasmine with clear hostility. His voice was unmistakable. "I don't care who you are. You people always think you have something to say." Gasps again. Then came the slap. It echoed across the room from the speakers. The court fell into complete stillness as Kane's open hand struck Jasmine's cheek. Her head snapped to the side. She did not flinch. She stood firm. The recording continued. The courtroom security ignored the act. The judge remained silent in the moment. Officers looked away. Kane cuffed Jasmine as she calmly repeated her identity. "I'm Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. This is unlawful." The footage ended. Judge Bernhardt looked down, then up at the defendant's table. "Officer Kane, do you deny this is you in the footage?" His attorney leaned in to whisper, but Kane's face had already turned white. Jasmine remained on the witness stand, still and composed. "This is not just about me," she said quietly. "It is about every person who has been treated like this and never had the power to show the world." Judge Bernhardt took off her glasses, the silence around her heavy and absolute. "I have seen enough," she said. The judge's voice echoed through the marble-panelled courtroom, calm but final. "Bailiff, place Officer Kane under arrest immediately. The charge is assault on a public official with intent to intimidate and obstruct due process." Gasps turned into stunned silence. The same officers who had once stood behind Kane hesitated. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure. Jasmine's eyes followed every movement. She said nothing. Her silence was more powerful than 1,000 speeches. The courtroom doors opened again, and 2 federal agents entered. They walked straight toward the defense table with determination. "We are here under the direction of the Department of Justice," one agent announced. "Officer Kane, you are also being charged with perjury, falsification of reports, and obstruction of federal investigations." Kane stood slowly, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. His hands trembled as the agents turned him around and cuffed him in front of the entire courtroom. Click! The same sound he had forced onto others. Now it rang out for him. Judge Bernhardt stood from the bench. "This court recognizes that what happened here is not an isolated incident. This is a warning. Every official in this room should remember, justice is not a performance. It is an obligation." Jasmine stepped down from the witness stand and walked past Officer Kane without looking at him. The courtroom watched as she moved toward the back. As she reached the door, people stood. First one row, then another, a quiet gesture of respect. Not for her power, not for her title, but for her courage. Outside, cameras were already flashing. Reporters pushed forward, but Jasmine paused on the steps. "There will be a statement." "But not now," she said. "Now it is time for the system to explain itself." The story hit every news outlet within the hour. Not just locally, but nationwide. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett assaulted by a police officer inside a federal courtroom. But that was only the headline. What followed was far more powerful. Clips from the courtroom security footage were leaked to the press. Millions watched in disbelief as they saw Officer Kane slap a sitting congresswoman and try to silence her with force. But the footage also showed what came next, the calm with which Jasmine responded, the judge's order, the arrest. Within 24 hours, the Department of Justice launched a full investigation into Officer Kane's previous conduct. What they found was deeply troubling. Dozens of complaints had been filed against him over the years, all dismissed without review. Internal memos surfaced, showing patterns of misconduct ignored by superiors, body cam footage missing, witness statements lost in transit. And then came the reports of intimidation, of victims who had tried to come forward but were discouraged or worse, threatened. Jasmine gave a brief press conference from the Capitol steps. Her voice was clear, her words direct. "This is not about me. This is about a culture of silence that lets power go unchecked. I did not press charges for personal revenge. I did it because every person who has ever been silenced deserves to see that silence broken." Behind her, members of Congress stood in unity, some from her party, others across the aisle. What mattered in that moment was not politics, but principle. Later that evening, a viral photo swept through social media. It showed Jasmine walking down the court steps alone, her head high, her face calm. The caption beneath read simply, "She never raised her voice." But the whole world listened. What began as an act of violence had become a movement. And the system, long used to hiding behind badges and sealed records, was now facing something far more dangerous than scandal. It was facing the truth. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Not with press, not just with politicians or activists, but with ordinary citizens. People who had followed the case from the very beginning. People who had once felt invisible, now watching someone who refused to be. Jasmine sat near the front. She wore no flashy outfit, no political pin, just a plain grey blazer and quiet determination in her eyes. Officer Kane was brought in through a side door. He no longer wore a badge, just a pale jumpsuit and handcuffs that clicked too loud in the silent room. The prosecutor read the charges again: assault on a federal official, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and perjury related to previous cases where body cam footage had disappeared under his watch. As the evidence was reviewed, the jury sat motionless. The slap had been just one piece. Witnesses came forward, officers, clerks, a woman who had been pulled over for a broken tail light and never reported the bruises, a young man who had been held overnight without reason and warned to keep quiet. Their voices, once dismissed, now stood in court with weight. When the jury returned, the judge read the verdict without pause. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was swift and firm: 10 years in prison without parole, immediate removal from all law enforcement records. A formal apology, ordered to be read, aloud in court to Congresswoman Crockett and the public. Kane stood stiff, his jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed something unexpected, not just anger, not just shame, a hint of disbelief, as if he had truly never imagined that someone like her could bring down someone like him. After court adjourned, Jasmine stepped outside into the sunlight. Dozens of cameras clicked, but she paused at the top of the steps and looked not at the press but at the people gathered in the street. No speech, no statement, just a slow nod, because in that moment she did not need to say anything. Justice had already spoken, and for once it was heard by everyone. Weeks passed. The story spread beyond the courtroom, across cities, into classrooms, onto dinner tables. It became more than a case. It became a symbol. Jasmine Crockett returned to her office in Congress, but something had shifted. Her presence now stirred something different in every room she entered. Not fear, not fame, but respect. She no longer had to remind people who she was. The video of the slap, of the arrest, of the quiet resilience she showed, had gone viral not for its drama, but for its truth. It was used in legal seminars, in law enforcement training, in school civics classes. One day, a letter arrived on Jasmine's desk. It was from a girl in rural Alabama, 12 years old. She had seen the story on her grandmother's phone. "You made me feel like I could stand up," the letter said. "You made me feel like maybe one day I could wear a suit and speak truth too." Jasmine folded the letter slowly. Her hands lingered on the edges. In that moment she remembered every second she had spent in those cold handcuffs, every second she had been told she did not belong, and how all of it had brought her to this. Later that evening she walked past the courthouse, alone, no cameras, just the quiet of a city starting to breathe a little easier. She stopped near the same steps where she had once stood as a defendant. Now she stood there simply as herself, not because of a title, not because of a case, but because she had refused to be silent, and silence had lost. Behind her the lights of the city glowed softly. In front of her the future was not yet written, but for the first time in a long time it would be written by truth, not hidden, not erased, and never ignored again. In the end, this was never just about Jasmine Crockett. It was about every person who has been judged by their appearance instead of their character, every voice silenced in rooms where justice should have been spoken, every truth buried under uniforms, titles, or fear. Jasmine reminded the world of a powerful truth. Courage is not loud. It does not always come with raised fists or roaring crowds. Sometimes courage is quiet. It is standing tall while others look away. It is remembering every detail when the world hopes you forget. It is choosing to speak when silence would be easier. And in that choice lies the beginning of real change, because justice does not start in a courtroom. It begins in the heart of the first person who refuses to accept the lie, and from that moment forward the truth has a name, a face, and a future. Jasmine Crockett chose to stand so that others would never have to kneel again.